presentation. We're good?
Oh, yeah.
We're live? All right.
You were live before?
Oh, we were. Well, just want to welcome everybody and our viewers from Chef AJ's group. So today we're going to be hearing from Dr. Lisle. We are live from the Fasting Escape Retreat Center. The Fasting Escape is where people can come here and get back into balance. So all kinds of things that we do in the outside world bring us out of balance. Diet, sleep, exercise, sunshine, laughter, appropriate response to stress, and a loving social circle. Those are things that we need to get back into balance. And the podcast Dr. Lisle and I do, and the information that I've learned from Chef AJ, Brian Wendell from Forks Over Knives, and John McMahon, and all the leaders in Shaded, all these leaders in the plant-based movement have given me enough knowledge and really inspired me to do something like this. And because of this, we've got a retreat center where people come and get healthy. So today we have a talk from Dr. Doug Lisle, my mentor, my friend, and I'd like to introduce him.
Very good.
Thanks very much.
All right, pleasure. Is that camera good, AJ?
Yeah, let me just, yeah, you look great.
That's not kind of what I was asking.
Oh.
All right. So people have probably heard this before, but there's different ways to do it, and sometimes you will learn different things on a second hearing. So this is the sort of two big problems in psychology, and one of them is actually a lot bigger than the other one. The small one is the one everybody wants to know about, and that's the one we'll do. The big problem in psychology is going to be what we call general psychology, and that is that, to give you the analogy, Gray's Anatomy. So Gray's Anatomy is studied everywhere, on Earth, and it works everywhere on Earth. So everywhere on Earth, if you're a doctor and you learned your doctoring in the Virgin Islands, doctoring everywhere, obviously, because what you've learned is the general anatomy and physiology of human. Once you do that, however, that doesn't make you a kidney specialist. So a kidney specialist, on the one hand, all the kidneys work the same in principle, and on the other hand, every single kidney is different. So this is the difference between Gray's Anatomy. Gray's Anatomy isn't going to tell you anything about the individual differences of every kidney you're going to see in your career if you're a kidney doctor. So psychology has two big problems. The first big problem, the most complicated problem, is the equivalent of Gray's Anatomy. How does the entire thing work? That's general psychology. That is what we talked about really in the pleasure track. We talked about the basic major motivational principles that guide humans, and then also where they get into trouble in the modern world. This is the second part of that problem. Actually, this talk came out of two different people squabbling. Those two people were John McDougall and Alan Goldhammer. And, John came to us a few years after we had written the pleasure trap. He said, "There's more to it. There's more to the story, and so you guys, go think about it. Come back with something." And Alan said, "Like what? But Alan had always had an open loop in his mind about individual differences, and the reason why is that because he put out a tremendous amount of energy with every client on an outpatient basis. I got to watch him. I would come, even when I was in grad school, he was already practicing, and I'd come and visit, and I would watch him, during his morning, and he would put out huge energy, with a series of jokes and a series of stories to teach each patient, and then he would. He worked physically very hard and mentally hard at trying to transform these people that were just local people in Rohnert Park in Santa Rosa who weren't necessarily health conscious, but he was trying to move them towards thinking more healthfully. And he would tell me that I could see that it was energy draining. He would put out a lot of it. He just did it every day. That's what he did for years. And he said, there's got to be some way for you to find the people that will do this as opposed to the people that won't. Now, at that time, I was in grad school, and I was being trained by a prominent experimental social psychologist, Timothy Wilson at University of Virginia. And the great lesson of social psychology is the lesson of general psychology. It's how everybody works. It's not the story of individual differences. And in fact, in psychology, there's a battle between the people that are very interested in the general story and the people that are very interested in the individual differences. And the people that are interested in the general story are social psychologists prominently, and the people that are very interested in the individual differences are called personality psychologists, i.e. the individual differences in every single one of you. And they're constantly at war. They publish in the same prominent journal called the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. I don't know how the personality people got first billing. They did. But being trained by Tim Wilson, I was basically told, like any kid that's been to synagogue or to church, there's a certain way you're supposed to think about things, and you're supposed to think about things as that we're not concerned with individual differences. That's the noise in the system. We're doing Gray's Anatomy here. And what's important is the general principles. And so I would tell Alan that the individual differences weren't that important. And in fact, what was most important is the general principles. And in fact, if you think about this, and if you read the Pleasure Trap, you'll realize, in retrospect, that's all we talked about in the Pleasure Trap. The Pleasure Trap is in fact the story of the Gray's Anatomy of the human mind, and how each and every one of us is subject to these same sorts of pressures and how those pressures work and result in us getting into trouble. There's not one sentence in there about individual differences between people. Not one. Okay? So that was the best that I could do at that time. Meanwhile, Alan was always quietly complaining, when are you going to come up with a sheet that's going to tell me who I can work with and who I shouldn't bother? Okay? He kept saying that, and I kept telling him, don't look at it that way because you're going to miss the big picture. And the big picture is we need to get better at helping everybody rather than worrying about who we should be trying to help and who we shouldn't be trying to help. John, you would have flunked any test that we... Okay? So, and that's actually a great example. So John McMahon, who's been on a phenomenal transformational road here in the last year, would have been someone who would have flunked the personality test and would have said, who should we work with? Okay? And so that's why I was not interested. And I knew that was true. I knew that any test of personality or individual differences at this point in the history of psychology are very crude, and they're going to miss way too much. And so much more important to think about general principles. However, McDougall's snarling. Alan's always been chirping. He always wanted the individual difference test. And so I thought, well, maybe we're going to go back to that question about individual differences. Maybe it's worth doing. So I went back and I started thinking about it, and it had been a long time since I even really thought about personality any more than you do and your friends do. In other words, we all think about personality a lot, but I hadn't thought about it systematically. I had been a professor of personality actually at Stanford, 10 years, 15 years earlier. And so I knew the field well, but I didn't consider that the field had necessarily that much to tell us. I just hadn't thought about it. So because of McDougall's nagging, I thought, okay, I'm going to go back and take another look. So this is the story of what was known and is known about personality. And then for the first time, I started thinking about applying it. And in the end, I actually found something a little bit humorous. I actually found that out of the 729 possible combinations, normal combinations, of personality types or profiles that you could come up with, there's exactly one that is the perfect personality for the problem of healthy living. And it turns out that I have met exactly one of those people, and his name is Alan Goldhammer. He literally has the perfect personality, and none of the rest of us do. And so the story then is, Alan always considered this to be a really easy ride. As soon as he figured out what to do when he was about 17 or 18 years old, he just did it. He never looked sideways. He has looked at all of us, including me, is these weak, pathetic, weak of the flesh, undisciplined, self-indulgent. His favorite phrase is, what is it? Pleasure-seeking, self-indulgent, pleasure-seeking energy. I can't remember. Pleasure-seeking, pain-avoidant, self-indulgent behavior. Whatever. It comes really fast and it's really insulting, which is exactly what it's meant to be. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to actually look at the story of personality. So we're going to put the story of general principles aside and look down into what makes each one of us different. And that's what this story is, and we're going to do it. This time we're going to use music, because it's going to turn out that every person wears their personality, and they don't even know it, and it emanates out of everything about them. So their clothes, where they live, what they read, who they get together with, who their friends are, where they want to go on vacation, what they want to do with their lives, what they eat, okay? How they dance. Every single thing about a person is emanating from some core characteristics about how it is that they're different from other people. It's precisely like looking at kidneys. If you look at kidneys, there's going to be several measurements that you would take, and that's going to tell you the story of the individual differences in those kidneys. The same thing is true about people. It's going to turn out that with just a few, literally a handful of concepts about how people are different, we're going to be able to figure out a great deal about why each of them has the kind of behavior patterns or choices that they have. So we'll start with what people like for music. Tell me, instead of songs, because that's going to be too hard, tell me artists. Just Mozart. Any artist.
Tony Bennett.
Somebody said Mozart. Hold on a second. I want to make sure that we have something that will show up at home.
Does that have to be individual or it could be a group?
Could be an individual or a group. Hold on a second. We've got to get Mozart here first. Mozart. Wait. Mozart too. Okay. All right. Tony Bennett. What do you think about that? Okay. All right.
Joe Satriani.
I wouldn't have any idea who that is, which is really good.
Steve Vai.
Hold on a second. Say that again.
Steve Vai.
Steve Vai. Okay.
Blues.
Van Halen.
Van Halen.
Led Zeppelin.
Yeah. Led Zeppelin.
John Denver.
Thank goodness somebody said John Denver.
Willie Nelson. Willie Nelson.
Willie Nelson.
P-Funk.
What's that?
Springsteen.
Oh, Bruce Springsteen, okay.
Pitbull.
There is such a creature?
Yes.
Gypsy Kings.
Gypsy Kings?
Gypsy Kings.
Gypsy Kings.
Oh, they're really good.
Cat Stevens.
Who's the blind guy I like? Andrea Bocelli.
Did you pick one? I think, are we supposed to pick one a person or?
No.
Okay, just could be
Bob Marley.
How about P-Funk?
Oh, you could say funk if you wanted to.
Yeah, funk.
But Bob Marley. Okay.
Bocelli.
Botticelli?
Andrea Bocelli, the blind guy.
Like Pavarotti,
He's like Pavarotti in there.
Okay.
The Beatles.
Beatles. Thank goodness we have a normal person.
Beach Boys.
Beach Boys.
Beach Boys.
Just as normal.
Michael Bublé.
Oh, yeah, he's good.
Mike, how do you...
B-U-B-L-E.
Oh, yeah, like the bubble guy.
Yeah.
Keith Urban.
Keith Urban.
I like
Oh, Ella Fitzgerald.
Ella Fitzgerald.
I love her.
You look good.
Nat King Cole.
Oh,
Yeah. Love him.
Is there electronica?
Phil Collins.
Huh?
I love electronica and techno.
Phil
Yeah,
Collins.
electro, if you call that music.
Darshana wants Phil Collins.
Phil
She made
Collins.
me travel to Mexico to see Phil Collins.
Harry Connick Jr.
Ah.
Oh, no, someone had to say it.
Sorry.
Frank Sinatra.
Yeah, he goes with
Thank
Taylor.
goodness. Somebody with some taste, finally.
Lady Gaga. Lady
Oh, yeah,
Gaga.
Lady Gaga.
Madonna.
B.B. King.
Oh, Nat King Cole. Is he up there?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
He's great.
Oh, yeah, Prince is good.
France?
Oh, Celine Dion.
BB, oh, you got BB King good.
How about J-Lo?
Jayla,
Jennifer
she
Lopez.
sings.
Jennifer Lopez. J-Lo for
Yeah,
short.
I know it is.
The other Jennifer better. What's the
Yeah.
one that didn't win Star Shirts? Jennifer
Hudson?
Hudson.
Jennifer
She's
Hudson.
good.
Oh, she's good.
Chuck E. Cheese.
I guess I got
Surely not.
Elton John.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
K-pop.
Okay.
Okay, let's look at this. We can go on a long time, obviously. You got some weird people in the room. It's going to turn out that the human personality really gets is essentially made up of 6 ingredients. They're made up of what we call the big 5, and then there's one more, which is intelligence. So the 6 major ingredients are intelligence. And then after that, they spell the word ocean, just for your own. If you want to know how fancy psychologists like me remember the big 5, it's because it spells ocean. All right. Openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, introversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Those are the big 5. And the big 5 were discovered actually in the early '60s, and then completely forgotten. So they were forgotten for more than 20 years. So somebody had essentially published some original evidence that looked like that this is what it was, and then everybody just, it was so far outside of the box as a concept, everybody just totally ignored it. So 20-something years later, some things happened that I believe probably gave rise to the reemergence of this, and that is that when I was in grad school, suddenly I can remember a day when I came in and my prof had a computer on his desk. So before then he didn't have one. And so then, another couple years later, we ought to analyze our data from any experiments that we ran. There was a huge mainframe system down in the basement of Gilmer Hall at the University of Virginia, where they had the big mainframe computers, and they had all kinds of really smart people that hated psychologists that worked, in the computer area. And we would run our programs that we would write to analyze data, and they wouldn't work. And you'd go up there swearing like everything's right on this program, everything's right. They'd say, no, right there's a period, and there needed to be a semicolon. I'm like, oh God, how was I supposed to know? And this is how it went. So you would take hours analyzing something to get the program to work right. And one day we used a statistical program called SPSS. And one day, my professor says, look at this. He had SPSS on his desktop computer. I'm like, SPSS on the desktop computer? That's unbelievable. And he goes, not only that, it's not picky. You can have all kinds of mistakes in the thing. You just write up what it is that you want, it spits it out. I'm like, it's unbelievable. I've spent 4 years fighting everybody in sight in the whole basement of Gilmer Hall, as all of us did. And, it was unbelievable. This is a revolution in data analysis. It took place right in my grad school career. And so it's happening everywhere, happening all over the world. And so people that had large data sets and personality could finally analyze their data. They could analyze it easily, it wasn't going to be a big hassle, so people started analyzing data probably that had been sitting around, or they started taking on survey projects that they wouldn't normally bother with. And what emerged sitting in SPSS were some important advances in mathematics that had taken place in the mid-20th century called factor analysis, which is where you can take large data sets and you can figure out, is there something that's driving the patterns that you see? Is there, so for example, if we're going to try to figure out what causes a cold. Is it that the people got a cold, or did they miss sleep, or did they touch somebody with hands that had a cold? Like, what was it? And so you might use factor analytic methods to try to figure out what's the most important factor that seems to be predicting this. Well, in this case, it turned out that there were 5 factors, or fundamentally 6. Once we get intelligence out of the equation, we start asking people questions about what they like. The reason why intelligence is off to the side is that it doesn't really tell us anything about what you like. It's really sort of how much horsepower is in the engine, how many mistakes it makes as it reasons. It's really what it is. So it's not really a preference issue, even though it's an important personality or individual difference variable. doesn't fit the same pattern as the other 5. The other 5 turn out to be telltale clues as to what you like in life and what you try to avoid. You know, what's the nature of the behavior pattern of your life? What's driving you to do the things that you want to do? Those turn out to be openness, conscientiousness, introversion, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So I know, for example, John's very open. John did not decide to spend his life in a library studying, I don't know, how a slide rule works. You've been everywhere all over the world and all kinds of wacky stuff. That's what he does. That's what open people do. And so if we look at this, we're going to find that the people here, the music that people make and the personalities of the people that make it are going to tell us something about openness. They're also going to tell us something about conscientiousness. They're also going to tell us something about introversion extroversion. They're going to tell us something about how agreeable they are. And they're going to talk also about how emotionally stable or unstable they are. So as we look at this, we know that people that have certain characteristics will like certain kinds of music, because this music will actually factor analyze into 5 factors, just like we would think it would, okay? Because the different kinds of music are, in fact, as a result, the reason people make that music and you've even heard of it is that it matches up to preferences inside of human individual differences, okay? So, for example, let's see, open versus non-open, okay? So we could look at this and we could pretty quickly, who would be sort of conventional? Conventional people, not crazy, not wacko. Frank Sinatra, pretty conventional. Tony Bennett certainly is conventional. John Denver, super conventional. There's like a not open right there. Okay, so people might say, wow, but you like to go to the Rocky Mountains, isn't that open? No, actually, what would it be if you went to the Rocky Mountains? What personality characteristic would be somebody that would like to hike back into the Rockies?
Adventurous.
Somewhat open, but not as important as introvert. Okay? So it's going to turn out John Denver actually was quite introverted. He just liked to spend a lot of time at home with his family, go up in his plane, didn't check the gas, died, whatever. Okay? Bottom line is that this guy was, he wasn't super introverted. He was open enough or normal enough in the bell curve that he could go out and be a musician and be a performer, but he was actually pretty on the quiet side. That's who he was. You've got other people, I don't know about Van Halen, if you know idea. But you're going to see the conventionality or the openness will definitely track its way through here. Somebody that would like Mozart would tend to not be as open. Okay. Also Mozart, it's going to turn out the more complicated music is, it's going to be easier and more pleasant for more intelligent people to listen to. Okay, so they're going to like that complexity, whereas you're going to find people that don't have as much horsepower aren't going to like it. It's uncomfortable for them mentally to actually keep track of a lot of the depth and the layering of how music's put together. So what we're going to do, we could talk about openness. We could also talk about agreeable. So let's see now. Let's look at who up here is kind of disagreeable.
Pitbull.
How easy is that? That person is that a group or a human?
That's a person.
It's a rapper, okay? So that's a you can tell how open I am. You can see that person is telling us that they're disagreeable, okay? And the very nature of rap is disagreeable. It's inherently argumentative. So those people are actually, that's the shtick. In other words, it's all about we're disagreeable. As opposed to James Taylor, whose big hit was You've Got a Friend. Okay, how agreeable can you possibly signal? That's what that is. So we see these, that's a striking difference. That difference doesn't take place by accident. And if you go to a James Taylor concert, it's going to look an awful lot different than if you go to a Pitbull concert. Okay. So these are, and as we go through here, Tony Bennett is going to be very agreeable. So Tony Bennett's songs are going to be very sort of, etc. Sinatra is kind of not necessarily that agreeable. He's going to be in the middle. He can go, he's a more diverse personality.
He did it his way.
He can do things his way. It's funny. It's funny, if you actually go on Wikipedia and look at My Way, that was written by Paul Anka. Paul Anka wrote My Way, and as soon as he wrote it, like over a night, and he got the music. He heard the music somewhere in Italy, and he bought it, and bought it for a song. And then he knew it was a great piece of music, and he sat up at night. He talked to Sinatra, and Sinatra had told him that he was thinking about quitting. So there's a conversation they had in the nighttime, and Sinatra's like, "I'm fed up. I can only imagine the music business. It's just got to be just unbelievably tough business." And so Sinatra had told his protege, Anka, I'm gonna quit. And Anka sat up all night, and he wrote this poem to this thing. And then he told Sinatra, "You got to listen to this. I wrote this for you." And the studio execs or the record execs told Anka, "You should sing it." He says, "No, it's not for me yet. This was all about Frank." And so Sinatra loved it, becomes his signature song. And not only that, it turns out, if you look on Wikipedia, it's been responsible for many, many murders. It turns out that a lot of people are so, this is like my way. It's going to be my way. Like a lot of guns have been drawn because it's male testosterone basically saying, So if you look it up, it's really quite an analysis. So inside of Frank Sinatra, there was some significant disagreeable. You could go both ways. But Nat King Cole, very agreeable, very, etc. So as we look down through here, we see that the Beatles, we saw them emerge as people. So they start out much more conventional, and then you watch these guys as they get their money, basically. They become super famous, and then we watch their real personalities emerge, is what finally happens. And so, i.e., general psychology says, do whatever it is that works. See? What you need to do. That would be general psychology. So even a really disagreeable, total impulsive jerk, if it's the only job in town, you say yes to the foreman if that's the only possible way you can feed your family. You're in some company town in 1910 in the coal mines. You may not want to do it, but you do it because you have to. Okay? So if you're the young Beatles and there's all kinds of demands coming at you, and there's something that people want, and there's incredible fame and fortune on the line, then you're the Beatles because it's working. But as soon as you get to where you need to get to, what do we see? We see these guys really start to diverge, and you see their very differences. John Lennon, far more open than Paul McCartney, okay? Just by nature. Those are different guys. McCartney's much more conventional, and was on no problem following a conventional success path later in his career, where Lennon was all over the place. That's just who he was. Both of them obviously outstanding in their own way, a phenomenal team. So we could go through here, but what we're going to be looking at is the following. You can entertain yourself. I won't go much further. We found Pitbull, for goodness sakes. We needed Pitbull and James Taylor up there. That's what we needed. But what we have are the following. Each of these personality characteristics actually, if you measure them, it turns out, just like if we were to look at how many nephron cells are in the kidney, and we were to look at 1 million people, we would find out fall in a bell curve. Okay? It's going to turn out that in nature, things will, biological entities will fall in bell curves. Now, you might hear that in nature things fall in bell curves, but that's not true. So the size of lakes in Minnesota does not fall in a bell curve. It falls in a different curve. Okay, so most of the lakes are small, and then some of them are a little bit bigger. So it's actually the size of the lakes in Minnesota looks like that. Okay, it's a very different shape. But when you see that, a light should go off in the heads of a scientist. And that is, if that's what that measurement looks like, then that means it's a living thing. Okay? It's a living thing. Okay? It means that DNA built it. And what DNA did is it built a prototype for the species, built a prototype kidney, or a prototype heart, okay? Or prototype eyes. And it built a system according to a particular set of specifications. And we wind up with one of those types of systems being the best one for that environment. And therefore, that gene that built it is the most common gene in the population. There's something else that's very close, okay? So for example, 15 years ago, probably the most popular car in the United States, or pretty close to it, would have been the Camry, okay? So the Camry was effectively the species prototype. And then something interesting happened. The Koreans came out with the Hyundais that were very close, and the Kias, and they were very, very similar. And you've got other similar ones. So you've got the other car makes, I can't remember. Honda, yeah, the Accord was a very close, those things were very close. And then something happened, and that is that these other things got a little jazzier, a little sexier, and it turned out everybody better moved towards sexier, and including the Camry. Okay, they're getting pushed by essentially market pressure, which is the same thing that happens in evolution. Creatures get pushed by evolutionary pressures into certain genes being more effective than other genes. Okay, so this is the species prototype, for example, for openness. So we can have IQ over here, and that's sort of one little thing, but I'm not that interested in that because I'm more interested in the story of preferences and people's feelings, because that's where personality sits. So this is going to be openness to experience, and what that's going to be is the people that are very open. This is very open over here, very adventurous, and over here they're very closed. And that's the first difference. So these are people that I don't know, bungee jump and have to go see Kathmandu before they die. And, I'm saying have been every capital in the world, all have to look at weird stuff, try different bizarre food, take weird drugs, all kinds of stuff like that. That's what happens out here. Okay. Over here, you just get a little bit more adventurous. Here, you get normal and sane. Here, you get boring. Okay? Here, you get very boring. Okay? So that's what that is. Okay? And the next one, next bell curve, is going to be conscientiousness. And so this is going to be how much anxiety you have about doing the right thing. So here we have very conscientious over here, and here we have flakes. Okay?
Define the right thing.
The right thing. The right thing is that which is, sort of in any manner of speaking, it's actually the thing that will be the safest, okay? And it could be, in other words, you're following reasonable rules or decision rules that will result in ultimately the best long-term outcomes. So the right thing, for example, this is where it can look a little confusing. So let's suppose that you are Atticus and To Kill a Mockingbird. Okay, and so the right thing is to do the best thing you can to defend your client. Now the thing is that that's going to be a problem because you're going to have a lot of people from the town telling you you're doing the wrong thing. So only a very high conscientious person they would have that circuit in their head. It would burn so hot they would do something even though everybody else would think it was the wrong thing. They still know it's the right thing. Okay, so this is hyper conscientious individuals. They tend to have a lot of anxiety because the anxiousness there, the mind is spending a lot of energy worrying about fairly low risks. You might say, well, this sounds fancy. And it is, because these are people that you want to hire, okay? This is so also people to some degree you want to have as friends. But it turns out this is actually the species prototype. So the species prototype actually is not as worried as these people. They are worrying the amount that is reasonable for the risks that are involved. So I have a friend that will call me from the airport, super hyper-conscientious individual who will say, John,
Not me, no, I
no, it's not you. I know it's
Not
not
me.
me. We've got a friend that will call and ask me whether or not he should waylay the pilot because he sees something on the back of the plane that just doesn't look like it's quite right. He wants it checked before he gets on the plane. Okay? And so this is what this is, and he has a lot of anxiety, and that's how that works. You get a strange thing because that very same person is also fairly open. Okay, so John and I have a mutual friend who's pretty open, but also highly conscientious, and that creates a lot of tension in the system because the openness wants to do something exciting and new, and the conscientiousness says, "Uh-oh, that could be a problem." And so you watch the cognitive dissonance fire off inside that nervous system. This is not a problem for me because I'm about here. Okay, by not being very open, life gets a lot easier. I mean, so it's boring, but it actually gets a lot easier. My friend Alan is here, actually, so I always thought I was wild and adventurous until I got out in the world, which I barely did. Okay, so the third thing is going to be introversion extroversion, or how sociable a person is. So this is going to be very extroverted, okay, and over here is very introverted. And so the species prototype, obviously down the middle, most people are sort of halfway in between, and really aren't either. Final two bell curves.
Dr.
Yes.
Lisle, a lot of people think just because a person's outgoing, they're an extrovert, but that's not true, right?
Right, that's correct. Yeah, you can be pretty outgoing, but you actually really like your quiet time, and you can get overwhelmed with it. Okay, so the Michael Jordan is reasonably. He can meet the public, but he gets overwhelmed, as you can imagine, being Michael Jordan. So when the Dream Team was traveling through Europe in '92, the guy that was out there in the crowds on the streets, being the Greek god for everybody to touch, was Charles Barkley. Charles Barkley is just tremendously extroverted. He just is, okay? Michael was sneaking out the back door, he and Larry Bird. Like, they didn't want to talk to anybody. That's how people are different.
So is that an act?
What's that?
Is that an act?
Charles?
No, when an introvert is acting extroverted, is it?
No, there's usually a specific purpose to the social process. Like, I'm actually very introverted, okay? But I'm perfectly comfortable with a group of people, and even if the group was larger, I'd be fine. Yeah, not a problem. But then, sorry, I don't like you people that much. I mean, when it's done, it's done. Yeah. So this is just how this is, and I'll explain why that is in a minute. Why it is that people have this, why we believe that this dimension even exists. We're going to look at all of these. Another one is how agreeable. So you're going to have people that are very, very nice and sweet, and you're going to have people over here that are very difficult. Okay, and so that's one of these major dimensions. And then finally, it's going to be sort of how stable people are. So over here, you're going to have people that are very stable, and over here, we're going to have people that are very excitable. Now, you might say, well, this is all cute. You know what I mean? People have been talking about personalities for a long time. You put some words up there on the board. Obviously, we recognize those words. Why do you think that those words are the words that map out human nature? Well, one reason is that if you took the English language, it turns out the average English speaker can talk about 60,000 words. And if you took those 60,000 words and you factor analyze them, you would find out that 18,000 of those words are 6 concepts. Okay? You are connoisseurs of these 6 concepts. Here they are. Okay? You could call it something else. We could say adventurousness instead of openness, but it's the same concept. And it turns out that there's going to be 3,000 or 4,000 words that all say the same thing. Okay? So you know that we're intelligence, but you also know the word brilliant, don't you? You also know the word genius, don't you? You also know the word moron, don't you? You also know the word stupid, don't you? You also know the word idiot, don't you? You know the word bright, dull. All those words are the same concept. They all define a bell curve of intelligence along which there's a continuum, and we use different words to denote different places on the continuum. But they're exactly the same idea. And no matter who runs the data set and what data set it is, it always winds up with the same 6 bell curves. Okay? So this starts telling you that there's something deep about this. And then it gets a little more interesting still. If you run the personalities of dogs, it winds up the same. It's not because people are describing the dogs. You actually look at the dog's behavior. It also winds up the same. So now we start thinking, wait a second, what do we know about this? We know it's genetic, okay? And it turns out that we can prove this, and at the same time that they were rediscovering the Big Five in the mid-1980s, different personality researchers were also discovering research done on monozygotic twins that were raised apart at the University of Minnesota. And when they did this, they tracked people down that had been separated at birth that were identical twins. And when they tracked them down, it turns out they were unbelievably similar in terms of their personalities. Whether they were raised apart or raised together, it didn't make any difference. When they look at people that had been raised in the same household by their biological parents, they were no more alike than people that had been raised apart that had been identical twins by completely different parents. And it solved the age-old question as to, is nature or nurture dominant when it comes to the human personality? And the answer is overwhelmingly it's nature. Okay? Now this was the ultimate of politically incorrect. So this did not go down well in academic psychology, and it still does not go down well in academic psychology. 30 years later, academic psychologists are still twisting themselves into a pretzel to deny this, but they can't. Okay? No data has ever contradicted this. Now, what's interesting about this to me, as somewhat of a historian of the field, that if you pan the camera back and look at this, you'll find that the 20th century began with people believing in individual differences. And this came out of Darwinian and then Sir Francis Galton School, ultimately through major innovators in statistics. Carl Pearson, who is the author of the Pearson product moment correlation coefficient, which is a foundational statistic throughout the scientific world. That guy was a eugenicist. He was one of these guys that thought that we have to worry about the lower classes breeding, and we have to be careful about this. Well, we got a problem along the way with this idea. It's not that it's inherently ridiculous. The problem is a guy named Hitler got hold of it. And when a guy named Hitler got hold of it, it all went bad. It went really bad. So by 1946, it was no longer legitimate in American universities to talk about individual differences in people being genetic. It had the stench of the Holocaust on it. And so that concept got parked. And what came into its place is what we know is learning theory, also known as the standard social science model, that on the back of B.F. Skinner, great Harvard professor of learning theory, and other learning theorists, of which there are many, define the new field, really, of in the science of psychology as learning. They were wrong. It would take 40 years until it would be okay for somebody to analyze the data again, look at the square in the face, look at what the evidence would tell us, and then we find out that we were mistaken. Turns out a tremendous amount about who it is that you are was their conception. And interestingly enough, when we go back in history, that's what people used to think. And not only that, folks, that's what astrologers think. If you think back, that's exactly what astrologers have been saying. Astrologers have been saying that on that day, this person was born and they had these characteristics, and they're born with those characteristics and they're going to die with those characteristics. Turns out they were right. They just weren't right for quite the right reasons. It turns out the reasons wind up being genetic variation. And so this is now the story. As we walk our way through personalities, we're going to find that the reason why these are the five, as opposed to five other things like, I don't know, what way do you straighten and put magazines on the table? Is that a personality characteristic? Do you tie your shoes with your right hand over the left or left hand over the right? Is that a personality characteristic? No. Those are individual tiny little quirks that predict nothing. These predict tremendous things. These predict the music that you listen to. These predict who your friends are. These predict what you're going to do on vacation. This predicts what your car looks like. I would present this at the prison I'd worked at. I'd come in, it just happened. I was out of my normal clothes, so I'm actually wearing a jazzy shirt that somebody bought for me. Otherwise, I wouldn't be in this shirt that looks halfway cool. And I would go to prison, and I would lecture, and they'd look at me and they'd say, Dr. Lisle, did you tear up the dance floor again? You know what I mean, over the weekend? I said, okay, you guys, you see if you can guess what my car is. And they'd say, Camry. And I said, yeah, you know the color. It said silver, and they were right. Okay? This is how it is. So now we're going to look at why are the big five the big five. And the big five are because they solve deep adaptive problems of the genetic code. So when it comes to openness, you can think of a rabbit. And that rabbit needs to decide how far it's going to go from the rabbit hole before it needs to come back home and check on the pups. Or that how far it can afford to get away from the rabbit hole before it has to worry about a predator getting it. So it may turn out that in a given habitat, the furthest you should go is 100 yards. But of course, there's going to be some adventurous rabbits that go 150 yards, and then there's going to be a John McMahon rabbit that goes 600 yards. Okay? There's going to be, all along the bell curve here, there's going to be these individual differences. Over here, there's going to be a rabbit that goes 50 yards, and that gene is still in the gene pool, but it's not as many. And then there's going to be a rabbit that only goes 5 yards, and that gene's in trouble. Okay, so this is what this is. And so this is, so you can see that throughout the animal kingdom, there's going to be an adventurousness, essentially, that's going to be associated with animals' search for mates and food and shelter. And that adventurousness, you can see that the animal would need a search image or a search program that would say, how far is too far? How have we investigated the landscape enough, and do we now need to optimize within the search parameters that we've already done, or do we need to go further in case we get something better? Really interesting. It's kind of like a young person trying to figure out a career and whether or not this job is good enough. They search around, and they need to get a feel for the landscape, but there's a point in time where they say, this is about as good as it's going to be. I've got a good job as a CPA and a good firm, and paying me well, or paying me as well as my cousin is at the other firm across the street. It's about the same size. Reasonable. Okay? So in other words, there's going to be a search process for resources that's going to go on, and personality is going to influence how much adventurousness is in the system. The conscientiousness is going to be how much anxiety is in the system to make sure all the little procedures are done right. So you can think of a mama rabbit that's going to come back and then lick all the little rabbits' heads. Make sure that everybody's clean, okay? And there's one of them that's going back there and that's licking them every half an hour, and there's the normal one's licking them every 2 hours, and this one's only licking them once a day, okay? These wind up with gunk in their eyes, can't see, and die. That's why that not licking your kids' junk out of their eyes winds up being not very successful in the gene pool. The one that's licking them every 10 minutes, super conscientious, doesn't get out and have enough mates and make enough rabbits. Okay? There's all what you're seeing under here is cost-benefit analysis, which is exactly the decision-making that every organism does on everything. So the organism is making cost-benefit on, is it worth going further, or do we need to stay closer? Do I need to redo that and check it, or do I not? Okay? Sociable is going to map onto, in social species, this dimension, but with respect to people. So the more people that you meet, the more possible mates you have, the more possible things that you learn, the more allies that you could have, etc. But and this might seem like it's unbelievably useful, and it should be, the whole species should be hypersocial. It is. The whole species is hypersocial. It's a frickin' freakazoid species. Okay, just watch them all. There's just no end to the talking and chirping. This is a hypersocial species, but even within a hypersocial species, there's a bell curve. Okay? So the middle of the species is unbelievably social. Wolverines don't talk to each other like this. There's one Wolverine per 50,000 acres. They have no interest in each other. Come together, mates, see you later. No, don't sing me a song. Okay? So this is how this works. So we are very social, some of us are really social, other of us are more introverted. Even the introverts want some contact, okay, to some degree. We think that it's speculated seriously that a reason for this dimension, this could have been driven by coevolution with a venereal disease. So it could be that looks like if it's not the whole story, it looks like it's a substantial portion of the story. The more social you are, the more partners you're going to have, and particularly if you're a female, the more partners that you're going to have, the more likelihood you're going to wind up with VD. The more likely you have VD, the more likely it is that you're going to be infertile. The more likely you're going to be infertile, less kids are going to be born. So there's a sweet spot in human nature for being open enough to give yourself a chance for optimal partnerships, and yet not so open as that we start to wind up statistically paying the price of VD. It looks like VD has been an extremely important co-evolving problem for human nature to be solving on the personality dimension. You can see that different problems would come up if you change an adaptive landscape and suddenly there's some little predator that's eating your kid's eyes and you've got to poke that stuff out of its eyes more, then more conscientiousness would start to evolve, okay? So these things are always dynamic, that nature is never static. It's always shifting around, looking for an ideal behavior pattern that will drive optimal behavior for survival and reproduction. The realness is going to be the fact that people do a great deal of cooperative action, and that 4 hands can do things that 2 hands just can't do. And so as a result, a lot of times you're going to be asked to help and to do a 4-handed job, and there's no way for them to pay for it right now. So people have to be agreeable enough to cooperate and keep a little accounting system flowing. And in doing so, Stone Age Village, accomplishes a great deal more with flowing credits and debits than it would if it didn't have that. So that's what human beings can do. But if they get disagreeable, then they complain and they negotiate and they refuse to cooperate, and now it's a problem for them because people don't want to trade with them. And so that's what happens here. Here. Okay? And people that are nice wind up getting exploited. So now it's like, gee, can you help me again? How about again? How about again? How about again? Okay? So they wind up on the wrong side of this. So the right thing is in the middle, where you're pleasant enough, but you're also defend your time. And so that's the most common gene in the human gene pool. But you're going to see it on both sides. And this is, so if we were to look for the perfect personality for human life in general, it would be here, 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 and finally here. Okay? So how stable a personality is how excitable it is about putting out energy behind some new idea. So here you can imagine the gold rush in 49 and some accountant being told this and say, listen, Horace, there's a gold rush in Sutter's Fort. It's just half a mile down the road. Why don't you go do something about it? Yeah, it's no blowover. It's no big deal. Okay? Just too stable, not excited enough. Here's somebody that's so excited and so devastated that when something a little bit bad happens, they're ready to jump off the cliff. Okay? So, Brian Wendell, got to tell me, Hollywood people, of which probably like this, all at least 2/3 nuts. So in other words, you've got an excitable that's willing to jump in.
It's not that low.
What's that?
It's not that low.
No, but this is, you're going to see in different industries, you're not going to have accountants look like movie producers. If you get them together, there's going to be a sort of a difference in the overall dynamics of what that's going to look like. Now, so these are the big 5, and we believe that the big 5 are the big 5 because they're solving timeless present problems of the genetic code, trying to guide behavior optimally. And now we're going to look at healthy living. And now we're going to see what this would take in the modern environment, because we have a really bizarre environment where you're trying to get healthy. In the natural environment, all you do is you just eat the food that's there, and you have to exercise. You don't have to go to the gym because getting the food requires the exercise. And you don't have to worry about getting to sleep on time because the sun goes down, you're not going to have a choice. Essentially, the water's going to be pure. There's going to be no drugs, no stimulants. And once in a while, you're going to have to fast because there wasn't enough food. There's sunshine in abundance. There's no getting around it. It's like, interesting. So we've got diet, activity, sleep, sunshine, fasting. We've got these major prerequisites of health that effectively will unwind the overwhelming majority of health problems that people experience in the first world. And yet, if we were to tell a doctor that this is what you need to have your patients do, they'd look at us like we were crazy. But understand that this is precisely what all of your ancestors did, down to the last man, woman, and child. So it's no surprise that when we reinstitute those things at a place like Fasting Escape, then people get better. Well, of course they do. But now how do we, what does it take to stay better in the modern environment? That's where the challenge is. So it's going to turn out that there is a perfect personality. If we were to give a score on each of these, low, medium, high, just 3 scores, then there would be, out of these 6 variables, there would be 729 combinations. Now, it turns out there's going to be one that's the perfect combination, and here's what it is. You would want to be very bright, because you need to be smart enough to understand there's a connection between biochemistry and health. So that's helpful. You would also want to be, interestingly enough, closed, because once you found out what it was going to take to do it, you need to be somebody that's happy eating brown rice, broccoli, and strawberries every day of your life. Right? You don't want any openness wanting to see what that Snickers bar still tastes like. Nope, that needs to be off the table. Right? You want to be very conscientious. Okay? You want to be introverted because you don't want to have any friends. Friends invite you over. Brian was saying just at dinner, we invited people over last night, and I'm sitting back chuckling, like, that's not something that's said between Alan and I. Yeah. Like, I never invite anybody over to my house. He never invites anybody over to his house. The only person that's ever been invited to his house is me. It's all real simple. And I've had my home for 12 years now, and he has still not come over to my house. Now, there's a pair of introverts. That's that. That's how that goes down. Okay? All right. The agreeable. So it pays to be disagreeable. Somebody says, would you like some, Alan? No. Why not? Because I don't want to get sick and die like you. Okay? And we want to be very stable. So there's no reason to celebrate anything, because every day is the same. And there's no reason to medicate, because there's no day that's down. There are no high days and there are no low days. Every day is a fine day in Goldhammer Land. Every day is the same. Okay? And this, folks, is the perfect personality. And when I sat down with these 6 bell curves, 15 years ago, or when this was, that it was actually after the trap was published, so it was McDougall coming to us in probably 2006, so it's been probably about 12 years. We went back and looked when I first spoke on the perfect personality. It was probably about that time. I sat down with these 6 bell curves, and I started thinking of people. And I thought of our friend Larry, and I went through there, and I thought, well, Larry's got an open side. He was a rock and roll drummer. He's told me about his drug history as a young man. Okay, so he's not here. He's here. He's very conscientious. Okay, so he was a very fine drummer. When he learned what he needed to correct his drumming technique from a master drummer in Los Angeles, Larry spent 7 hours a day in his apartment for 2 years, practicing the drills over and over and over again, and he ultimately became the drummer for Loretta Lynn. Okay, so this was no slouch. You don't get there without very high conscientiousness. Larry's pretty extroverted on this side. He's relatively disagreeable. More than I'm thinking?
More.
We'll give him here at least, okay? So
Nobody likes to work with him.
What's that? Nobody likes to work with him. Yeah. Oops. So, and then in terms of stable, I would put him probably in the middle. And so what we're going to see is that Larry's openness, which is about here, his openness battles his conscientiousness, and he's sociable, so he's going to want to be around other people quite a bit. He doesn't get pushed around by other people in there what they want to do, but he will have his good days and bad days. And as a result, there's going to be some celebrating and medicating. around food, just like a normal person would. Okay, so he's done. How has he done? Pretty well. Pretty well. Why? Well, he's smart. He's smart and conscientious, and those two things have kept him, even though the other personality characteristics have consistently tried to pull him off course, those personality characteristics have kept him in the right quadrant. That's how that works. So I probably thought about Larry because just because he was probably whining to me about one of his blood parameters, you know what I mean? And I said, well, then quit eating ice cream, Larry. And we have all the tension, okay? But then I thought about Alan. And I thought, okay, let's just do this for fun. Let's see. He's very smart. We know that up there. I know he's very closed. So I know that Alan doesn't like any adventure at all. I mean, people kind of think I'm joking about this, but let me tell you what the truth is. He goes to essentially one restaurant. One restaurant. He's lived in Sonoma County for 35 years. One restaurant. There's maybe 2 entrees that he will eat out of this vegan restaurant. That's it. 35 years. Done. Okay? Not interested. You talk to him, oh, there's a travel ban, you can't go to Sweden. Well, who would want to go to Sweden? Who would want to go anywhere? Why leave the United States? Well, actually, Alan, what if they say you can't leave California? That's not a problem. Why would you ever want to leave California? Well, actually, you can't leave Sonoma County. Well, who would want to leave Sonoma County? This is more or less what goes on here, okay? The highly conscientious, in other words, he's got a dynamic tension that wants to get it done right. He is introverted, obviously. In other words, he's not uncomfortable in groups either, but he has had one party at his home in over 30 years. I was at that party. It's a New Year's party. So his wife finally wanted to have something normal. Like, could we have a New Year's party? So she invited all of her friends, who are all actually, as you'd expect, quiet, pleasant, respectable people that like to hike and be in nature, okay? So all of her friends come. Alan doesn't know any of them because he's not met any of the husbands and couldn't care. Why? Introverted, okay? Not open, doesn't want to know, forget it. So they all come and I show up. And so I don't know anybody, so I'm just talking to Alan. And then McDougall shows up. Alan invited the one person he knew in Sonoma County. So John and Mary came, and they're hanging out, and this thing is just the deadest thing in the world. Of course, there's no music on. The food is really bland. It's Goldhammer food. And the whole thing is just the most sedate thing you can imagine. So by about 9:30, John and Mary are like, Doug, we're out of here. So they leave, and Alan looks around and says, why don't we go to my office and start working on plans for the next year? That's what we did. At Alan's one party, we spent New Year's working on plans for the next year. That's how that looks. Carol of fun, okay? The high conscientious, introverted, disagreeable. Okay, so he's not so disagreeable that it's impossible, but he's over here easily in that top third of that quadrant. So he's not going to make, he really couldn't care less if what it is that he's doing or saying makes anybody uncomfortable. He's just conscientiousness and disagreeable, completely comfortable speaking the truth and having you be uncomfortable about it. So there's no way that he would ever feel any social pressure around any social gathering. In fact, once we were at some place and there was hardly anything to eat, and Alan started taking, the lettuce that they use as decorations under things, he started taking lettuce out of the decorations to make himself a salad. I'm telling you, these are stories you couldn't make up. They really happen. And finally, he's very stable. So you just almost never see any emotional turbulence at all. He's the only one I've ever met. Okay? This is the perfect personality, and that ain't us. Nobody in this room, can run the table like that. You won't run into one very often. We'll each have our elements. We each have our strengths, and so if you're nice and disagreeable, that's good. That's a good thing. But if you are, no matter what it is that you are, wherever you are opposite any of these strengths, then we need to patch our way around the weaknesses. And so this is, so if you're very open, this is where you need to have, this is where this endless need for new recipes and new ideas. So Alan, trust me, Brian, just so you know, he won't be trying any of your new recipes. Because he doesn't need anything new, but a lot of us do. We need things that are novel and interesting that we haven't tried before. That's part of being a person who's open. And so your repertoire, it makes it a harder journey because you need a wider repertoire. And that's how that works. So more work has to be put in here in order to make this journey a journey that will work for you. If you're not so conscientious, if you're a little disorganized, then you may need to hire some conscientiousness. So I have people that are pretty effective in their lives at what they do and they make a pretty good living, but they just can't get it together. They're sort of out of energy, and I tell them, hire a cook. I had a woman this last week at True North who's a very successful executive in New York, and I told her, well, you've got to hire a cook. Nah, too expensive. I'm like, you've got to be kidding. I have a college kid, $15 an hour for 5 hours a week for $75, and you're going out. You're $75 a week, and you're going out, and you're spending it. You're paying somebody to make your food. It's either a person in a restaurant or it's a person in your house. How do you want it done? And if you want it convenient and easy and right there for you, then hire it done, for goodness sakes. She said no. Why? Disagreeable. Sort of a lawyer. Just calling you if you're sociable, this isn't necessarily a problem, except you're going to be in far more situations where there's going to be social pressure and opportunity. So it's going to make it more difficult, and it's going to you're going to lean on the conscientiousness that you have. But a big problem is if you're sociable and you're agreeable. Because if you're social and agreeable, people are going to ask you to try things. You're going to be uncomfortable refusing things. This is going to be a problem. And this is where, I've shot a video called Getting Along Without Going Along, which is also, there's a chapter in my book, I think, by that title. Some very simple ideas that we use to just work our way around that. We tell people, thank you, not now, maybe later. We just circle around this problem. If we get confronted a little more, we just say, not right now, I'm just trying to keep on track for a little bit. We try to gently step our way around this pressure so that we don't have to go along with them in order for them to be comfortable. That's all we want to do. And nice people need that help. Difficult people need to know this as well, because they turn these things into fights, and then we have nothing but trouble in terms of social process. So that's no good either. We want a middle ground of pleasantness, because we're going to be doing something that's going to make people uncomfortable, and we want everybody to be as comfortable as possible while we go about doing our healthy living. And finally, when it comes to medicating and celebrating, all I can say is the thing to do is to make sure that you've got the ability and knowledge and access to some kind of treats that are healthy. And so tonight here we had a variety of outstanding fruit. That was a perfectly excellent treat. And there's going to be other things and interesting desserts that follow a healthy path. These are things that we can have that help keep us away when we may be teetering behind our openness and our stress levels and our rebelliousness to want to do something, wild and self-destructive and what's Alan's phrase? Short-term, self-indulgent, pleasure-seeking behavior. Got it. It's been years since I've listened to it or recited that, but that's what it is. So when we start to get pulled that direction, what we're going to want to do is reach for things that may hit those circuits, but remain within the boundary lines of reasonable, healthy living. That's really the story of the perfect personality. I don't have it, you don't have it, anybody does not have a perfect personality for healthy living, because healthy living today requires a bizarre personality. It actually does. It's an unusually strange personality that would fit this problem. We now have a strange ecology for people to try to be pursuing healthy living in. And so each of us, our natural strengths that work so well in other areas of our life can easily work against us with respect to this particular problem. So knowing yourself and then preparing for where your weaknesses are playing off your strengths, that's how we're going to wind up on a good, consistent path where you have the life you deserve.
What's nature going to do? Because it doesn't matter. Healthy living is irrelevant to reproduction and survival because we're in abundance, we've got tons of choice, we can reproduce,
Right.
we can generally live until we're, can have grandkids
Yeah,
and be unhealthy the whole time. So there's no evolutionary pressure.
none. No, the pleasure trap is now forever.
Yeah.
Pleasure trap, it will be the problem that will confront humanity from this day forward. And that's just how it is. So it used to be the diseases of kings, that kings were the only people that had such abundance and a bunch of effort to make their food so processed and so super delicious that they could indulge themselves and wind up with the diseases that we now see as being ubiquitous in the Western world. So you're correct, John. These problems are never leaving us. This is why we need people like AJ, and this is why we need places like Nathan's place here. We need written works. We need magazines like Brian Wendell's work and Darshana. We need help, and yours. We need people to constantly have a different look at this message, so that one day it hits them just right, and they decide that this is a day I'm going to turn to the right direction, and I'm going to start on a path. And then they need all the support possible, because this is a totally unnatural path to choose. It's the right one, it's the most difficult one, and it's the most rewarding one. But it's not easy, and that's
Is
the
there a
story.
pattern for addiction?
There isn't one pattern. Yeah, there's that. You can get there in a lot of different ways. Okay? All right, that's it. Thank you very much. Okay. Do we have any question or two? Anybody else? Oh yes.
Can you touch on, like, if you knew your score, I can see how you get the 729.
Yeah.
What, like, if you wanted to find a mate, what would you look for? Would you look for somebody similar to you, or would you look totally opposite?
If you wanted what?
If you wanted to find a mate, would you look
A mate?
with similar scores, or?
Actually, you kind of naturally do this. So this is what we call assorted mating, and it's a characteristic of our species. So we do sort right through these things. So it's going to turn out that if you're too exacting, then you're just hosed. There's no way. So it's going to turn out that, but you're usually not. So someone who's very open, it's very unlikely that they can handle somebody over here. This person would find them wacky crazy, and this person would find them boring. So you have to be within latitudes of acceptance. The same thing is true for intelligence. So, a very bright person has to have people that are quite bright. An average person is going to be actually uncomfortable with a person that's either very bright or not very bright. So you have to be within a latitude that works. Same with conscientiousness. So my friend Larry, who's very conscientious, his wife is about here. She's like one notch more conscientious than he is. So they're both a couple of wackadoodles. That's just how it is. You know what I mean? But life makes sense to them up there. And they couldn't tolerate somebody that was 30 or 40 percentile lower down in the average ranges. That would drive them nuts. So we do this, and you kind of do it naturally. And that's what getting to know somebody is that you think that they're within your latitudes of acceptance, and then it turns out 3 months later, they're not. Okay? That's where a lot of love affairs go south, is right there, is because you finally got enough evidence. You can't choose what your latitudes of acceptance are. Those are innate. Like you discover what your latitudes of acceptance are. And so, but when it's close, nature says you've got to give it the benefit of the doubt. That's what nature does. So nature will fire up romance circuits if it feels like it's close. And then very often it will find out, no, can't do it. That's how that works. Okay? All right. Incidentally, this is why the fact that these personality characteristics emanate from so many choices, this is why young people have always talked about music to each other. Is because they're using music preferences as a score sheet for the Big Five. That's why they're doing it. And so that's kind of an interesting thing to note, that it comes across in all these different preferences and things that we do. Okay? Yes, Brian.
Why is it beneficial for your mate to be, like, why is it beneficial for the species for you to be so close to your mate? On these curves.
That's interesting. I think that's actually a really good question. My guess is that you're going to have probably the relationship itself will be too contentious. So raising children, which is what mating is all about, in principle in evolution, is going to require joint action and a lot of joint decision making. So if those two people are remarkably different in their personalities, there's going to be a lot of discord there. So just in general, I think the further people get away from each other, the more discord there's likely to be. Which is why Alan has one friend, one wife. He's had one girlfriend in his life, i.e. his wife, and then he's had me, and that's he's done. So go ahead, you guys try to get in there. Just try to get into that group. See how it works out for you.
So basically looking to other people in the village for that variation.
Yeah. Yes, that's right. And so people like Alan and I, Alan actually is so naturally sort of self-contained organism that his desire for openness is very small. Mine is actually at least on the chart. It's kind of like when you're a kid, your kid's like, oh God, good, he's on the chart. Yeah, I'm on the chart. And that's led me to make more friends from more diverse places that has enriched my life. And that's been true. And so then I go and try to tell him, hey Alan, this will enrich your life. Meet this guy. He's like, nah. So, maybe a little, 20 minutes. We'll give you 20 minutes. But that's sort of how that works. Is that, and then there's people over here that these are people that if you have very open and very sociable and some agreeable, these people connect people like crazy. Okay, they just connect up all over the place. Those are people. There was a fascinating little test that I didn't know existed. It was in one of Malcolm Gladwell's books. Gladwell's been kind of an interesting writer who has taken academic social psychology, not so much personality psychology, but social psychology, and brought it to the modern world. And pretty good, pretty clever. Doesn't know anything about evolutionary psychology, but as a popularizer of basic standard experimental social psychology and so forth, and to some degree personality psychology, those are good books, and they have all of his books have been interesting to me. And in one of them, he shows a list of about 150 last names. And the test is, how many people do you know that has one of those last names? And I knew 2. And at the end of it, it says, if you know less than 20, you're way introverted. I'm like, holy smokes, I knew 2. I had until I took that test, I was aware I was introverted, but I actually didn't understand how introverted I was. It's either that or I have a really bad memory for names. But yeah, that was a very, very interesting test, and I'm sure Alan would have been right down there with me. Yes.
So, are Alan's parents, were they similar in personality type to him?
Yeah.
Like, was it from his dad or from his mom? Or?
Both.
Really?
Yeah, they were. He was a very clear amalgam of those two people. And I'm a very clear amalgam of my 2 parents. There's no question.
Wow.
So when I get nasty and argue with people, that's my dad. And when I'm friendly and warm, that's my mom. And that is how it is. And my friends will say that if they ever get in an argument with me, which isn't often, but once in a while they will, and it gets tough, Larry has a name for that because it's Son of Ralph. Son of Ralph just came out. Look out! And so that's what you are. Actually, your personality, it seems like and has seemed like psychologists, and I think even personality psychologists tend to think of them as blends between 2 parents, but you're actually not. You're a composite, and that's because these characteristics are inherited, one gene at a time, and very often there'll be a block of genes where there'll be a whole slew of them, the way the genes work and cross over in reproduction, that there'll be a whole suite of genes that will come from one parent, and those will be the ones that are dominant in you. And so that's why you can have your dad's feet, you have your mom's elbows, and you got your dad's lip, and I got the big nose from my mom's side. My sister got a perfectly good nose from my dad's side, and I wind up with this, okay? That's what nature does, and nature just sort of deals these cards, and what you are is a composite. So it can look like you're a blend, because very often, two parents are, for example, here and here.
Right.
Okay, so as a result, if the child's somewhere around here, child's very likely to be somewhere in that range, and so therefore, it just looks like you're a blend. But where it gets really interesting is when you have two parents that are extremely different on a dimension. And so I met a person whose mother was extremely disagreeable, and the father was extremely agreeable. Now this is interesting. This is the only guy that could have lived with that woman. Okay? And this is the only guy. Like, you have to be way over here to put up with this. All right? And so this young lady actually had very diverse reactions throughout her day. Okay? So literally, she would be super sweet to people, and then something happens, it just blows up sky high. And you're like, wow, what is that? You know, took me a while to figure out what on earth was the underlying thing here, and what that underlying thing is literally independent neural circuits around those dimensions, led to what looks like bizarre behavior, but it's in fact just as principled as any other behavior that you'll see in personality. Okay? All right, it's enough for one night. Very good. Nate, be careful with these.